Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Necromancer beta. We're going to be looking at an interesting feature that I have a lot to say about, which is the Realms of Fate. Now, I've tried to do a lot of research on these and couldn't find much information, but we'll kind of go over what we know and what we can assume from them. So the Realms of Fate are several new zones in Act 4. Essentially, they just add new bounties to Act 4, which is great. I always like having new bounties added because it adds more variety into what you're doing when you're playing, like during a season or whatever, and you're having to do the bounty runs to get all the materials and whatnot. That's fine. If that's all this is, that's great. But the interesting thing here is that the zones are stitched together versions of all of the different tile sets. From my understanding and from what I've tested, it appears that they are preset versions of these zones. Just like if you were to go into any Act 4 zone, most of the time it is the exact same thing, right? But the problem is, it seems that they would put a lot of effort into something like that just for it to be a new zone. And we have a couple theories on what this actually is. But again, I've tried to go and do a lot of research, and I have found surprisingly little on this information for the Realms of Fate, other than that it is caused rather by the Nephilim fighting Diablo in the high heavens, and it's kind of like torn the fabric of reality, and that's like the story thing behind it. So that's why all these zones are like, stitched together. But my theories on why this exists, there's three of them. And we're going to go from the least likely to the most likely. Least likely is that this is a cut feature from an expansion that they were going to make and are no longer making. The reason I say that's the least likely is because it seems like a weird feature to have an expansion. It's like, oh, all the zones are, can be cobbled together, and that adds variety to Greater Rifts if they wanted to put that into like a Greater Rift feature. I have more thoughts on that in a moment, but I think that's the least likely of the options here. The second least likely of the three is that it is a testing ground for a new feature to come in Greater Rifts in a future season. Maybe that they're trying to test whether or not people like this idea of the zones being stitched together. And if that's the case, how do they add that into Greater Rifts? Because these seem handcrafted, and in the game currently, with how they've done this, it doesn't seem like they have the I guess procedural generation to throw together different tile sets properly. And the way the tile sets work together and are made to work together are very intentional, and it doesn't necessarily seem like they have the tech in the game right now to be able to continue down that trend where they're adding in different like zones to each other. Because again, all this stuff in the background seems more like it's handmade and not put together procedurally. I would definitely like if that came as a Greater Rift thing, right? Because it means all the Greater Rifts you're doing and all the normal Rifts you're doing would have a lot more variety, because you wouldn't necessarily get like a really bad tile set and have to like push through to the end of it or try to skip a ton of stuff to get to the end of that tile set. It would mean that you would get a small section of a bad tile set, and you can kind of overlook that and move forward and try to get to the good ones as you're going through your Rift. I wouldn't mind it being, like several medium-sized levels of this kind of thing, and then that's how like Rifts would work. But at the end of the day, again, it doesn't seem like that's necessarily what they're testing, so that's why that's like the second least likely thing. And then the most likely thing, my third, is that this is just a new zone that they're adding, and it's cool because bounties, right? Like that seems like the most likely option here because there's so little information on it. But I just find the fact that there is so little information on it very intriguing. I like the idea, as I've said earlier, I think the idea of stitching together the different zones to add variety is a really cool idea. It means that if they had that in Greater Rifts and normal Rifts, it would change the way that you do Rifts most of the time. Because instead of trying to like fish for a really good tile set with really good enemies on it, if every single one of these little stitchings either had, different enemy types and different tile sets, you would find as you go through certain levels, sections of it to be difficult, but other sections of it to be very relieving. Like you see maybe Punishers on like an Act 1 map, and you're like, Act 1 is great, but Punishers, not so much, you know? So you then move on, and then you find like Anarchs and Exarchs on an Act 4 map, and you're like, that's also not good, so you skip on to the next one. But then you find, you know, typical zombies on like an Act 2 or 3 map, and you're like, that's way better. So you kind of go through the one level of this as if, you know, think of it the size of a normal like Greater Rift level, but where everything is stitched together and you have a little bit more variety in what you're doing. It means that your really good rifts where you get like all of one enemy type on a ton of really good tile sets, it means that those would happen less frequently, but it also means that the frequency of having just a ton of really bad rifts in a row wouldn't happen as much, because you would have tiles in those rifts that are really good for you. So it kind of would average out over time. And I like that because it, again, it discourages fishing for a rift and more encourages fishing for good portions in the rift. So that's my hope. And, you know, if they want feedback on these zones, it's that they do add it to greater rifts and normal rifts, but the problem that they would have to overcome is the stitching together of zones and how that works from a programming level, and how it decides logically how to do that, because you would have very specific points on those levels that would be allowed to be stitched together. So you would run into some predictability of where the stitching would happen, but for the most part, it would remain fairly random, which would be nice. So that's my feedback, is like, if they were to continue down this thought, put it in rifts, put it in greater rifts, I would love it. It would make all of that way better. But again, I just can't help but think that maybe this is just a new zone that they're adding, and that's why there's not a lot of information on it. I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you like the idea of zones being stitched together and maybe coming up with really cool tile sets based on, you know, just having different variation in the tile sets as it goes? That seems to me, at least, to give a way better and more varied version of a greater rift than, say, you know, what we normally get now, where it's just a level of a tile set and then you move on to the next one. I don't know. What do you guys think? Again, would you also like to see more of this stuff in the future in different zones? That's another thing, is like, this is only in Act 4, but it seems like they could pretty easily add it in other acts, but it would kind of break down on the narrative of it. Because the narrative of it at the moment is that because you fought in the high heavens with Diablo as a Nephilim, it broke things, and that's why these exist in Act 4. But maybe they could kind of adjust, and actually I shouldn't say maybe, I know that they could adjust it to work in other zones as well, which would add more variety into those other zones. But it's variety at the cost of like real variety, because a lot of the bounties here are just like kill a dude and go and clear a chest, a cursed chest event, and it's like, those are cool, but maybe just having new bounties rather than bounties in new zones might be better, because it gets tiresome doing the same bounties over and over. And I don't mean like, you know, the exact same one in a zone. I mean the same type of bounties, cursed chest events and cursed shrines and all that, and killing the dude. That's fun and all, but maybe just new bounties in general might spice it up. We'll see, though. I'm interested in this. I'm interested to see where it goes, and I'm kind of like using this video as a bit of an archaeological dig, so I can come back in, you know, a year and be like, what did they do with the Realms of Fate, and what was my thought process on what they were going to do? It will be interesting nonetheless. But with that being said, we shall see you guys next time.